Thank you very much. And Karina, we're so very proud of you and for your courage, your love of history, and thank you for just setting the occasion for us today. So I'd like to just give you one more round of applause because you're awesome. As was mentioned by Karina, 400 years ago in Port Comfort, present day Hampton, Virginia, some 20 and odd Negroes, as was they referred to in the manifest, arrived on the shores and formally began the documented history of over 12.5 million Africans brought to this country and to South America and the Caribbean in a brutal form of chattel slavery that required, to be successful, the dehumanization of black people because of their skin. And it set in motion a 3.5+ century journey that for some worked really well. It built this nation. It built nations in other countries in South America and the West Indies. It made America the most profitable country in the world, but built on the backs of a stolen people who were brutalized, raped, separated from their families over and over and over again. And it's important to sit with that, the pain and the anguish of what happened and what we're commemorating today. Commemoration is not a celebration. It's a marking of an important moment in history that means so much to so many, both now and for our future. So I want to thank all of you for being here. We had a very powerful breakfast upstairs that brought together black leaders from the African immigrant community, from the African American community, from the faith community to discuss and commemorate this occasion. I think it's important to mention that while we celebrate all the accomplishments of African Americans and Africans in this country, we commemorate today the brutal history that led to that and required that perseverance. It's also important to note that these were not the first Africans to touch our shores. To be historically correct, there are some almost 500,000 Africans that were here prior to 1619, and slavery as an institution didn't formally come into existence until about 20 years after in 1638. The system of chattel slavery that led to our economic prosperity today. It's important to note that there were 760 families here in Montgomery County in 1860 that owned slaves, concentrated in the northwestern part, but also in places like Germantown. It's important to note that at least 2 of the 3 individuals that we know who were lynched were dragged out of this building, former courthouse, and we're going to be commemorating that as well as we go forward with the Reconciliation Commission. It's important to note that my colleague, Councilmember Sidney Katz, mentioned upstairs that in 1956, did I get that date right? Yes. That's when we finally said we're going to desegregate our schools, and he was in kindergarten at the time, first grade. It's important to note that just a couple weeks ago, or a couple months ago, I was pulled over and profiled in my car for being African American and driving. It's important to note that that's happened to many others, that we arrest people at higher rates in this county because of their color of their skin. It's important to note that similar to the 1 in 5 black children that were separated from their parents during slavery and sold other places, here we are separating children from their families because of their skin color and their language and their country of origin. So while we commemorate this, we have a lot of work to do. And I want to thank my colleagues for being bold. I want to particularly thank the council president for being bold in this racial equity agenda that we're going to propose. Has been proposed, and we'll do legislation soon. I want to thank her, and I want to thank all my colleagues. I'm going to invite up all by name, and I need my list, so I don't know where Pam is, but I need my list. And then we're going to read the proclamation. We have several organizations here representing parts of the black community here in Montgomery County. One of the things that's so important to me is that we all come together as black people. Those 20 and some odd Negroes who got off that boat at Port Comfort were African, and their blood runs through our veins and our ancestors' veins. And we are a very diverse black community in the county. If we're going to move the needle on any of these issues in education and health disparities, we are going to have to come together and do it together. And so that's why I wanted to bring this breakfast together this morning, and I appreciate everyone being here for the proclamation. So with that, I'm going to invite people up. Great. Willa Watson, representing Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. And leave your call signs out, y'all. Don't do that, okay? You know. Warren Fleming, representing the Damascus Connection. Art Williams and Pat Grant from the African American Health Program. Reverend James Boney from Faith Community Baptist Church, and his lovely wife is welcome to come as well, if you want. Reverend Barry Moultrie, if you want. Is it Linda Moore? Linda, are you here? Yes, okay. From UCAB. Uh-oh, I'm running out of time. Kimberly Harris, is it Harvest? Harris, I'm sorry, Kimberly Harris. Yes, Kim, from AKA, Sorority Incorporated. And I have to acknowledge the lovely Michelle Jawando is here as well in the front, my wife. Pamela Young from the Links Incorporated. Byron Johns and Anita, where's Anita? From NAACP. Omega, I always mess up your last name. I'm gonna let you say it. From Immigrant Community Services and also the African Immigrant Caucus. Sola Alojegbe from the African Affairs Advisory Group. Sophie Sase from the African Immigrant Caucus. Alyssa Bonner from Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated. Also Pamela Luckett from my staff from Delta Sigma Theta. You can come up as well. And I'll acknowledge Anita Powell from NAACP, as well as Lincoln Park Historical Association and many other things. And I am representing and distributing Councilmember Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. So I will accept on their behalf. And then can you just pass me the proclamation? We have proclamations for every group represented today to commemorate today, and hopefully be the beginning of our work of working even more together to improve things. And then I'm going to bring up shortly Jim Stowe. You can come up now, Jim, from the Human Rights Commission, who's going to say a few words momentarily. Actually, Jim, let me let you do that first. Do you want to do that before the proclamation, or I'll do the proclamation? Okay. The County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland. Proclamation. Whereas in late August of 1619, a ship carrying a cargo of 20 enslaved Africans arrived at Port Comfort, or present-day Hampton, Virginia, through the transatlantic slave trade. And whereas across 3.5 centuries, from 1501 to 1867, more than 12.5 million Africans were captured, sold, and transported to the Americas under our barbaric and dehumanizing system of chattel slavery. And whereas the system of chattel slavery facilitated America's rapid economic growth and competitiveness, and in fact, many of Montgomery County's most successful early families, whose names grace our streets today, were slave owners. And whereas freed slaves who lived in Montgomery County had to carry their papers at all times or risk being sold back into slavery into the South, others who were enslaved chose the perilous journey for freedom, traveling on foot to Pennsylvania and later escaping to Canada. And whereas, despite living through some of the most horrendous atrocities in human history, Africans and African Americans, both free and enslaved, are responsible for building the foundations of this nation. and have impacted every facet of American life. And whereas slavery and the anti-black racism it required bequeathed to America an irrational fear of black people, which remains a hallmark of our society today, including in our criminal justice system. And whereas many remnants of slavery and racism remain in our country and county, including the racial wealth gap that has been fueled by segregation, inequities in public health and education, discrimination in housing, and exclusions that perpetuate inequity. And whereas, against all odds, Africans, African Americans, the descendants of slaves in the United States, continue to persevere and fight for equality, achieve excellence, and strengthen this nation as educators, business owners, executives, and elected officials. Now therefore be it resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland hereby commemorates 400 years since enslaved Africans arrived in America, and be it further resolved that the County Council recognizes the incredible character, resilience, and numerous contributions by African Americans in Montgomery County and around the United States that make our country and our county great. Presented on this day, the 10th of September in the year of 2019, signed by myself, Will Jawando, and our council president, Nancy Navarro, but included with the entire county council. Thank you very much. And we're going to have our Director of Human Rights, who is the person I am presenting this to. Officially, it's going to go on their wall in the Human Rights Commission at a very prime spot, I hope. And we're going to have him say a couple of words. Yeah.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. 1619, the year, but a footnote now, brought to these shores, as you've heard, 20 and some odd Africans. The city's ships were able to hold a number of pieces of cargo because that's what the Africans were considered as cargo. They also said that when they stacked them feet to feet and head to head and arm to arm, you could smell a stench that one could barely imagine. They said then that they were especially interested in the children because when you store cargo, space is at a premium. And so you can get a whole lot of children in a very small space. And so they stacked them one upon the other. Can you hear them? Can you hear the waves beating against the ships? Can you see them deciding between suicide and making this perilous journey? Some 2.5 million made that decision. Can you see them revolting and rebelling on the ships? Can you see them? Can you hear them as mothers cry out as their children are being taken from them, as their daughters are being hoisted to the main deck by the captains of the ships and the crew and passed around from person to person? Can you see them? Can you hear the screams that are part of this passage? Some 12.5 million, as you've heard, made that journey. But even more, never made it to the ships because they sought to die or fight or simply perish on the way to the ships and to the shores. Can you see them? Can you hear them? They found their way to the shores of this country and began a process by which they would enable themselves to see this new land that was being talked about that they never got a chance to really see and experience. But they still persevered and still saw this image of one day being free and able to have their children and their wives and their families all together again and not be part of the carnival shows on street corners as they were being sold in lots and sizes and in pairs. Can you see them? Can you hear them? And so we as a nation began to figure out ways to do something about this great injustice. And so we end up in this grand scheme of things, and we end up passing the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, and then say we can do better. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the Civil Rights Act of 1875 and of 1957 and 1960, again, over and over, trying to raise the issue of making human beings be human beings. Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Civil Rights Act of 1965, the issue of voting, the very, very premise of our society, being able to cast your vote for your leadership. Well, we're still fighting the good fight. We're still fighting for the same thing. And what bothered me more than anything else, my friends, when I did my research, what bothered me more than anything else, it was not some issue or concern about human beings themselves. It was all about profit. It wasn't so deep to have me dehumanized. It didn't go that far. This was simply about how it is that I maintain riches, how I maintain influence, how I maintain power. That's what it was about. And that's what it's about today. That's why the struggle. That's why they're repeating over and over and over again legislation aimed at doing the same thing that was done 200 years ago. And so it is in Montgomery County, established here as a Human Rights Commission in 1960. Began the work of trying to figure out how we make it work here in Montgomery County, how we do things differently here. And we did some things that were pretty unique at that time. Public accommodations, fair housing, and toward the issue of employment. Great stuff. But the challenge still lies ahead. What do we do with this issue called racial equity? What does it mean when we try to figure out how we, in fact, distribute the resources, the precious resources we have in this county? Who gets them? Who benefits? And who does not? We're going to talk about this issue of reconciliation and remembrance as part of the lynchings that took place here in Montgomery County. 3 of them. It's going to be a painful story for many of us. Not asking for guilt here, my friends. What we're asking for is how we move forward. How do we stop the vicious cycle? And so it is then to this council, to Councilmember Will Jawando, and to all the other members, our president, Nancy Navarro. Here's the challenge. We have put in place legislation, but we have not enforced it. We have not paid for it. We've not given it the undergirding that it needs. And when push comes to pull, the issue of power and influence always come back. And those who have it really, really reject the premise that they should ever give it up, not realizing that all of us win. Can you just imagine where we would be as a society if all of us worked together and my human potentiality got maximized? Not based on the color of my skin, but rather my ability to learn and to become part of this great nation. Where would we be? And so it is. I close with this. When it is finally ours, this freedom, this liberty, this beautiful and terrible thing, needful to man as air, usable as earth, when it belongs at last to all, when it is truly instinct, brain matter, diastole, systole, reflex action, when it is finally won, when it is more than the dreams of those who seek it, more than the blood of those who shed it, when it's more than the guilt of the original sin of my captivity, and beyond the lofty words of our founding fathers and the promised words of well-intentioned politicians, when it is more, these men and women and children, these slaves and former slaves, these black jewels of Mother Africa, chained and beaten to their knees, exiled from their faraway home, still visioning a world where none is lonely, none hunted, none alien. These people, superb in love of life, the land and culture, and the history and pride of their beginning, these people we remember today. Oh, not with statues, rhetoric, not with legends and poems and wreaths of bronze. Not with ceremonies and tributes, not with these things alone, but with the lives, our lives, grown out of their lives, lives fleshing their dream of the beautiful, needful thing, freedom.